The boy never made a sound. Not once. Not when the chandeliers above him caught the light and scattered gold across the marble floor. Not when 200 of the most dangerous men in America filled the grand hall with laughter, clinking crystal, and quiet threats dressed up as conversation. Not even when a man in a $5,000 suit leaned toward the person beside him and said, loud enough to carry, "That's the deaf one. The air. Can you believe it?" The boy's name was Leo Karan. 7 years old. Small for his age. Standing near the vintage jukebox in the corner of the hall like he belonged to it, or maybe like it was the only thing in the room that didn't look through him. He wore ash gray. Everything about him was still. His father, Dante Karan, stood 30 feet away. Tall, broad, tattooed up one side of his neck. He held a glass of champagne he hadn't touched, and he watched the room the way a chess player watches a board. Not at the pieces, but at the spaces between them. Nobody in that hall looked Dante Karan in the eyes for longer than 3 seconds. Nobody argued with him. Nobody tested him. Nobody laughed too loud near him. Except Leo. Leo didn't do any of that. Leo just stood there, silent. His small hand resting at his side. His dark eyes moving from face to face the way a child does when he's trying to read a room he was never invited into. The whispers had started an hour ago. The Karan heir is deaf. He'll never run the empire. Dante must be ashamed. Hi viewers. If you found out that a powerful man's child had been secretly harmed from birth, and the person responsible was standing right there in the same room, would you stay quiet? Or would you burn everything down? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know. That question mattered more than anyone in that room realized. Because something was already moving, already in place, already breathing. The waiter's name was Soren Vale. White shirt, white trousers, short sleeves rolled once at the wrist. He moved through the crowd with a tray of drinks and zero expression. But if you looked closely, and Dante always looked closely, something about Soren Vale didn't fit. He never got turned around. He never hesitated at a doorway. He walked through that mansion like he had memorized every corner of it long before tonight. He avoided the blind spots. He clocked the armed men without staring. He moved like someone who had trained for rooms exactly like this one. Dante watched him from across the hall. Said nothing, did nothing, filed it away. Then came the moment. One of the alpha guests, wide jaw, rings on 3 fingers, voice like gravel, spotted Leo near the jukebox and smiled in a way that had nothing kind in it. He nudged the man beside him, said something low, and they both looked at the boy and laughed. Leo didn't react. He never did. But Soren Vale, across the room, tray in hand, stopped walking. He looked at the guest, then at Leo. Then he set the tray down on the nearest surface, walked to the jukebox, and pressed a single button. A deep bass tone rolled through the floor. Slow, heavy, like a heartbeat amplified. The room didn't stop, but it slowed. Soren crouched beside Leo, eye level, calm as still water. He didn't speak. He didn't gesture wildly. He just gently placed Leo's palm flat against the side of the jukebox's wooden cabinet. The bass pulsed under the boy's hand. Once, twice, 3 times. And then Leo Karan looked up. His face changed. Not dramatically, not like a movie, just opened. Like a door that had been shut for years had finally caught a draft. His eyes found Soren's face. And Soren smiled at him, small, quiet, like he had been waiting. Dante Karan's champagne glass lowered an inch, because across the hall, his son, the boy who had never reacted to a single sound in 7 years, was looking at another man like he could feel something. Dante's jaw tightened. He didn't move, not yet, but his eyes never left Soren Vale. And then, without warning, Soren leaned close to Leo, still crouched, and pressed one more button on the jukebox. The bass dropped deeper. And Leo smiled. Dante. No one looked directly at him, but every single person in that hall tracked him with their peripheral vision the way animals track a predator they've decided not to challenge. He stopped 3 feet from Soren. The waiter stood, unhurried, turned to face Dante like he had expected him. That was the first thing that bothered Dante. No fear, no apology, no reflexive step backward the way people always took when Dante Coran entered their personal space. Soren Vale just stood there, hands relaxed at his sides, and waited. Leo was still touching the jukebox, still feeling the pulse of it. "What did you just do?" Dante said. "Low, even. I turned on a song," Soren said. "Don't." Soren looked at him steadily. "He can feel frequency, bass specifically. It's a tactile response, not hearing, not exactly. But it's real, and it's been ignored." Dante studied him, every part of him, the way his shoulders sat, the way his breathing didn't shift. The calluses on his hands, not waiter's hands, not even close. "Who hired you?" Dante asked. "Castillo's firm, event staff. And before that?" A pause. "Just one. Medical security, classified contract. Retired." Dante let that sit in the air between them. Behind him, the party continued. Crystal clinked. Someone laughed too loudly. A deal was being made near the fireplace. The world kept moving, but right here it had stopped. "Medical security," Dante repeated. "Yes. For who?" Soren looked at him, looked at Leo, then back. "For your son," he said. "The night he was born." The bass from the jukebox pulsed once more through the marble. Leo's fingers pressed a little harder against the wood. Dante's face didn't change. It never did. But something behind his eyes shifted, the way a locked door shifts when the right key is finally inserted. He did not raise his voice. He did not reach for the gun at his side. He simply said, very quietly, "Walk with me." Soren followed. They moved through a side corridor, away from the noise, and the crowd parted for Dante the way it always did. Automatically, without being asked. The corridor was long. The walls held old paintings of men who looked like Dante. Men who had built something and bled for it and then died defending it. Dante had grown up walking this hall. He had memorized every face. He had never trusted a single one of them completely. He stopped near a tall window, city lights far below. The sky pressed black and still against the glass. "You said the night he was born," Dante said. "That hospital was locked down. No press, no staff without clearance. How does a medical security contractor end up back in my house 5 years later carrying champagne?" Soren's answer was a straight line. No decoration. "Because I've been watching who comes near your son." Silence. Not comfortable silence. The kind that has weight. "And," Dante said. Soren reached into his breast pocket. Dante's hand moved toward his side, just slightly, and Soren slowed the motion, deliberate, and produced a single folded piece of paper. He opened it and held it out. It was a scan of a medical log, dated, signed, and at the bottom, next to a medication listed under a different name, was a dosage that made no sense for a delivery room. Dante read it twice. "That's a sedative," he said. "A sedative with a known side effect," Soren said. "In high enough concentration, administered to a newborn in the first hours of life, it causes permanent cochlear damage." The city lights blurred slightly behind the glass. Dante did not move. "He wasn't born deaf," Soren said. 3 words, 4 syllables, and the entire foundation of 7 years cracked clean down the middle. Back in the hall, the bass from the jukebox rolled through the floor one more time. And then, from somewhere near it, came a sound. Small. Broken. Like a voice that had never been used before was trying to remember what it was for. Dante turned. Soren was already moving. The sound had come from Leo. Not a word. Not yet. Just a breath that had edges to it. A shape, like something trying to form inside a throat that had been silent for years. But it was enough. Glasses stopped mid-air across the hall. Conversations collapsed mid-sentence. 200 men. Men who didn't blink at violence. Men who had ordered things that couldn't be said aloud. Stood completely still and stared at a 7-year-old boy by a jukebox. No one spoke. Leo's hand was still on the wood. His eyes were wide. Not frightened, startled. Like he had reached into a dark room and touched something unexpected. Something warm. Dante was back in the hall in 6 steps. He positioned himself beside his son without touching him. Present. Close. But not hovering. He looked at Soren. Soren gave him one small nod. And then the moment broke. A man at the back of the crowd, heavy build, yellow gold pocket square, the kind of smile that had never once been honest, started a slow, theatrical clap. "Well," he said, "I've seen better magic at children's birthday parties." His name was Marcus Priel. He ran import contracts along the Eastern Corridor, laundered through 3 different fronts, and had been angling for a seat at the Koran table for 2 years. He laughed at his own words. 2 of his men laughed with him. Nobody else did. Dante looked at Marcus Priel the way a man looks at a bad check. Flat. Unimpressed. Calculating. He said nothing. That was worse than anything he could have said. Priel's smile flickered. He reached for his champagne glass. "Come on, Dante. The boy's been standing there all night like a little statue. It's just..." "Finish that sentence," Dante said. Priel stopped. The 2 men beside him stopped. The entire hall recalibrated. Every person in it adjusting their body language, their posture, their proximity to an exit. This was not a rhetorical challenge. Dante Koran did not do rhetorical. Everything he said was a promise or a warning, and he did not repeat himself. Priel swallowed, set down his glass, chose silence. Smart. But the damage had been done. Leo had heard the tone of it. Not the words, but the shape of the room shifting. He was pressed slightly closer to the jukebox now, his hand still on it, and his eyes were moving fast across faces the way they always did when he was reading what no one would say out loud. Soren was to his left. Calm. Still. He hadn't reacted to Priel at all. But he had moved 2 steps closer to Leo in the moments after Priel spoke, and his eyes had gone to the far side of the room, to a man near the fireplace who had not clapped, had not smiled, had not reacted to any of it. Just watched. Soren tracked him without turning his head. Practice thing. Professional. He said nothing, but under his breath, barely a sound, barely a breath. Not again. Dante caught it. He didn't show that he caught it, but he caught it, because those 2 words, quiet as they were, told him everything. This wasn't Soren's first time watching a threat form around Leo. This was recognition. This was someone who had been here before, in a different room, in a different year, watching the same pattern repeat. The jukebox was still playing. The bass rolled through the marble floor, slow and steady. And then Leo moved. Not toward Dante. Not toward Soren. He turned to face the hall, his small hand still resting on the side of the jukebox, and the bass pulse moved through him like a current. His shoulders dropped, his chin lifted, and his foot just slightly tapped. Once. The sound of it on the marble was barely anything, a whisper of leather on stone. But 40 people saw it. And 40 people felt their chests tighten, because the boy who never moved to sound had just moved to sound. And someone in that room, someone holding a glass and wearing a smile, went very, very still. not out of awe, out of alarm. Dante fell off him like a mask slipping, and then he put it back on. Smile restored, glass raised. Just another guest at a party. Dante filed the face away. He didn't move toward him. Not yet. Instead, he moved toward Leo. Slow, deliberate. He crouched beside his son the way Soren had, same level, same posture. And for a moment he just looked at him. Really looked. Leo looked back. His dark eyes were steady, calmer than they had been an hour ago. Soren crouched on the other side. He placed Leo's palm flat again against the jukebox's vibrating cabinet. The bass was still rolling, deep, rhythmic, something from decades ago that had been designed to be felt as much as heard. Soren looked at the boy and did something unexpected. He tapped his own chest, twice, in rhythm with the bass. Leo watched. Then he looked down at his own hand on the wood, felt the pulse of it, tapped his chest. Once. The bass hit again. He tapped again, matching it. 3 people nearby were watching with their hands over their mouths. Nobody moved. The room had reorganized itself around this moment. The aggressive conversations had gone quiet, the laughter had dissolved, and 200 dangerous men were standing perfectly still because something was happening that none of them had a name for. Dante's jaw was tight. His eyes were burning. He was not a man who cried. He was not built for it, had not been raised for it, had spent 30 years constructing himself into something that didn't bend. But right now, crouched beside his son, watching a boy who had lived in silence learn the rhythm of his own heartbeat against a wooden jukebox cabinet. Something in Dante's chest was coming apart at the seams. He didn't let it show, but it was there. Soren leaned a half-inch closer to Leo and spoke. Not loud, not performative. Just directly, quietly into the space between them. He said, "You hear it, don't you?" Not a question. Leo looked at him, and then Leo opened his mouth. The sound that came out was not clean. It was cracked and uncertain, shaped wrong, like a word trying to climb out of a space that had been shut too long. But it was there. It had edges. It had intent. His, Leo said. And then again, softer. Voice. The hall went absolutely silent. Someone dropped a glass. It shattered on the marble and nobody looked at it. Dante stood. Slowly. Fully. His full height, shoulders square. Every inch of him present. He looked at his son, who was still touching the jukebox, who was still feeling the pulse of it, who had just spoken 2 words for the first time in 7 years. Then he looked at Soren Vale, the waiter, the man in white who had walked into his house with a tray and a secret, looked back at Dante without flinching. All around them, the room was fracturing into whispers. Miracle. Did you hear that? That child just spoke. I thought he was. Dante turned toward Soren. Spoke low enough that only Soren could hear him. My office. Now. Soren stood, smoothed his shirt, gave Leo's shoulder one brief, gentle press. Grounding. Then he followed Dante without a word. At the edge of the room, the man near the fireplace watched them leave. His glass had gone warm in his hand. His smile was back. But his eyes were calculating something. Inside the office, Dante closed the door, turned. He was studying Soren the way he studied contracts, looking for the clause that would ruin him. How long? Dante said. Since the day after he was born, Soren said. And you waited until tonight. I waited until I had a reason to believe the second attempt was already in motion. Soren looked at him steadily. I was right. The second attempt, Dante repeated slowly, and then Soren said it. Quiet. Clean. Final. Your son wasn't born deaf. Dante's hand went flat on the surface of the desk behind him. Not dramatic, just steadying. Steadying something that had just shifted beneath him. Outside, the bass from the jukebox pulsed on. And somewhere in the hall, in the crowd, the man by the fireplace set down his warm glass and pulled out his phone. Dante didn't yell. He never yelled. The most dangerous version of Dante Caron was the quiet one. The one with the flat voice and the still face and the eyes that were already 3 decisions ahead. That was the version in the room right now. He stood behind his desk and Soren stood across from it, and neither of them sat down because this was not that kind of conversation. "Explain it," Dante said. "All of it. No gaps." Soren exhaled once. Then he started. He said he had been part of a classified contract unit, private, not government, but with government access, that specialized in protecting high-profile births. The kind of deliveries where the bloodlines involved made assassination attempts a legitimate operational concern. Leo's birth had been flagged months in advance. Not by Soren's unit. By someone feeding information into a network that Soren's unit monitored. Someone had been tracking the pregnancy. Someone had known the delivery date, the hospital wing, the specific attending physician, the security rotation. The level of detail was not a leak. It was sourced. It was someone on the inside. Dante's eyes didn't move from Soren's face. "That night," Soren continued, "we intercepted a personnel substitution. A nurse on the floor had been replaced. The replacement's credentials were clean on the surface, but the biometrics didn't match what was on file. We flagged it and moved to intercept." "And the baby swap?" Dante said. "Aborted. We stopped it before the transfer could happen. The substituted infant was removed. The replacement nurse was detained off-site." Soren paused. None of it reached the official report. That was deliberate. The contractor firm handled the containment. Standard protocol for that tier of client. "Then why?" Dante said very carefully. "Is my son deaf?" Soren looked at him. "Because during the chaos of the interception, a sedative was administered to the room to slow movement, create confusion. Standard crowd control compound. Non-lethal." He paused. "Except at the concentration used in a room with a newborn in the first hours of life, it caused cochlear nerve damage." Dante stared at him. "Someone," Soren said, "used a dosage that was higher than protocol." "Accidentally," Dante said. "No." One word, and the room went cold. "The dosage was deliberate," Soren said. "Someone in the unit adjusted it, either to create the damage directly or to ensure that even if the swap failed, your heir would be compromised. Weakened. Easier to dismiss." Dante's hand pressed harder against the desk. "I've spent 2 years tracing it," Soren said. "The unit was dissolved after that contract. Most of the operatives scattered. But the paper trail didn't fully disappear." He reached into his jacket, produced a second document. Not a scan this time. An original. Yellowed at the edge, folded twice. "This is the field log from that night. The dosage entry was altered after the fact. But the original ink marks are still there under the correction. A forensic document analyst confirmed it 6 months ago." He placed it on the desk. Dante did not touch it. He looked at it. Read it from where he stood. His breathing was steady. Everything about him was steady. But his eyes, for just a moment, showed something raw and unfinished. "You said the second attempt is in motion," Dante said. "Yes. Tonight. Possibly. In my house. Someone in that hall right now is not here for the party," Soren said. "I don't know the exact method yet, but the pattern matches. High access. Familiar face. Patient approach." Dante looked up. "Who?" "I don't have a confirmed name, but I have a behavior profile." Soren's jaw was set. The person I'm looking for has been inside your circle long enough that you stopped noticing them. They don't escalate. They don't draw attention. They move slowly. They wait. Dante was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then he said, "How do we find them tonight?" "We already started," Soren said. When Leo responded to the music, "I was watching the room." Dante went still. "One face stopped smiling," Soren said. "Not out of surprise, not out of awe. Out of something that looked a lot more like fear." Dante's eyes narrowed. And when Leo spoke, Soren added, "I saw the same face reach for his phone." Dante turned toward the door. "Your enemy," Soren said behind him, "isn't outside this mansion. He's been drinking your champagne all night." Dante's hand rested on the door handle. Still, controlled. And then, from somewhere beyond the door, from the grand hall where the party was still running, where 200 men stood talking and drinking and pretending, a sound drifted through. Small, clear. Leo's voice. Again. 2 new words. And Dante's blood ran cold. Because the words his son had just spoken. Those 2 quiet, cracked, precious words were the name of a man. A man who was in that hall. A man Dante had trusted for 11 years. The name Leo had spoken was Callum Voss. Dante didn't run. He walked back into the hall the way he always walked into every room, like he owned the air in it. Shoulders level. Face blank. Eyes moving. Callum Voss was still near the fireplace. 11 years. That was how long Callum had stood inside Dante's circle. Handled logistics. Managed territory disputes. Sat in rooms where things were decided that couldn't be written down. He knew the accounts. He knew the suppliers. He knew where the bodies were. Sometimes literally. And he was standing right there, drink in hand, laughing at something a man beside him had just said. Dante looked at him and felt nothing dramatically new. That was the worst part. Because looking back now, really looking, the signs had always been there. The moments where Callum had asked questions he didn't need the answers to. The times he had been present at meetings he wasn't required to attend. The small, unremarkable way he had always positioned himself close to Leo without ever appearing to. Dante had read it as loyalty. He had been wrong. He moved through the room and stopped beside his head of security. A broad man named Reeves, quiet, reliable, who had been with him for 6 years. Dante leaned close and said 4 things very quietly, very fast. Lock the east exit. Pull the guest manifest and cross it with tonight's service staff. Get a medical sweep done on any drink that went near Leo in the last hour. And watch Callum Voss without him knowing he's being watched. Reeves didn't repeat it back. He simply moved. Dante returned to the center of the room and accepted a glass of water from a passing tray. He stood where he could see everything. The chandeliers threw gold light across 200 faces, and he studied each one the way a surgeon studies a scan, looking for the thing that shouldn't be there. Soren had come back into the hall and positioned himself near Leo, who was still by the jukebox. Still calm. Still feeling the bass pulse against his palm. The boy's face had changed since earlier. Something in it had unlocked. Like a window had been opened in a room that had been sealed for years. Dante watched Callum. Callum laughed again. Said something. The men around him responded warmly. But his eyes moved. Every 45 seconds. Exactly. Dante counted. Callum's eyes moved to Leo. Then to Soren. Then to the exit. Then back to whoever he was talking to. 45 seconds. The rhythm of a man checking his plan. Dante set his water glass down. And then Reeves was back at his shoulder. Quiet. Close. Boss, Reeves said. Low. Steady. The medical records from the service entrance log tonight. Something's off. Dante didn't look at him. How off? Reeves hesitated exactly 1 second, which for Reeves was a long time. The records from the birth. The hospital records. Someone pulled them 3 weeks ago. From inside the estate server. Dante's fingers went still around the glass. Someone inside the estate had accessed the files. Not hacked in. Accessed. With clearance. With a passcode that only 4 people held. And the room around him. The laughter, the music, the crystal, the men in their $1,000 suits. All of it became very thin. Like a stage set. Like a performance that had been running for 11 years and had just reached its final act. Reeves said it quietly, the way you say something you know is going to change everything. Boss. The medical records were altered. Dante gave the room 30 more seconds. He needed 30 seconds to decide what kind of man he was going to be tonight. The kind who reacted. Or the kind who moved. He chose to move. He crossed to Soren without looking like he was walking toward anything specific. Just a man adjusting his position in his own home. He came to a stop beside the jukebox and crouched once to say something to Leo. Stay here. Don't move from this spot. And Leo looked up at him with those dark, steady eyes and gave the smallest nod. Then Dante straightened and said to Soren, barely above a whisper, Vault room. Now, you first. They went through the east wing. Not the main corridor, the service corridor, narrow and unlit except for low wall sconces. Dante knew this house in the dark. Had walked it at 3 in the morning more times than he could count. He knew which doors creaked, which tiles ran loose, which cameras he'd deliberately left with blind spots because sometimes he needed to move without a record. The vault room was behind the library. Steel door, biometric lock, no windows. Inside, filing systems, hard drives, a safe behind the south wall, and wooden crates of physical documents going back 30 years. The Quran history, the real one. Not what lawyers had on file. Dante went to a locked cabinet on the east wall. Keyed in a code. Pulled the drawer. He found the original hospital file from the night of Leo's birth. The version his personal legal team had obtained and sealed after Leo's diagnosis. He'd read it once, years ago, and then locked it here because there was nothing in it that helped. Doctors who said the deafness was congenital. Tests that confirmed it. Signatures from 3 specialists. He laid it flat on the table. Soren placed his field log beside it. They stood over both documents. Soren pointed. The attending physician's signature. Look at the angle of the pen on the second loop. Dante looked. He wasn't a handwriting expert, but even he could see it. The signature in the official file and the signature in Soren's field log. They matched in shape but not in weight. One had been traced, carefully, by someone who knew what they were doing. The authorization for the sedative compound, Soren said. In the field log, it was logged at 11:47 p.m. In your official file, the same compound doesn't appear at all. Someone removed it during the document revision. Dante studied the pages. The dosage, Soren said. Even if you believed the official file, the compound was used in the room. The residue showed up in a secondary blood panel taken on Leo at 36 hours. That panel result is also missing from the file you have. Dante looked at the space where it should have been. A gap in the sequence. Page 12 jumped to page 14. Page 13 was gone. Someone, Dante said slowly, had access to the official file after it was sealed, and the clearance to alter it without triggering an audit, Soren said. Dante stood up straight, because only 4 people had that clearance. Himself, his attorney, his personal archivist, a man who had retired 2 years ago and moved out of state, and Callum Voss. The room was perfectly quiet, just the faint sound of the party somewhere above them. Muffled bass, muffled laughter, 200 people who had no idea what was happening 30 feet below them. Soren's voice was measured. The toxin used on Leo wasn't just a sedative. At that dosage level, in a newborn, it was designed to cause damage and then become undetectable within 72 hours. Whoever specified that dosage knew exactly what they were doing. Dante said nothing. It was never meant to make him deaf, Soren said. Pause. It was meant to kill him. The words landed in the vault room and stayed there. Dante's son, 7 years old, standing above them right now near a jukebox, tapping his foot to a beat he was just beginning to feel. Someone had tried to kill him before he was a day old. And the man who had done it had spent 11 years sitting at Dante's table. Dante turned toward the door, then stopped. Both of them heard it at the same time. Footsteps. Outside the vault door. Slow. Deliberate. Moving toward them. Soren killed the light. One move. Fast. The vault room went black. Dante didn't reach for his gun. He pressed himself against the wall beside the door and waited. His breathing slowed. His heartbeat didn't. Some things even Dante Karan couldn't fully control. The footsteps stopped outside. A pause. 5 seconds. 10. Then they moved away. Down the corridor. Back the direction they'd come. Soren turned the light back on. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Dante said, "We go back up. Separately." Soren nodded. He tucked the field log into his jacket. Dante closed the cabinet, relocked it, left the official file on the table face down. Undisturbed in appearance. They went up through the service corridor. Soren entered the hall first. 2 minutes later, Dante followed. The party was still running. Denser now, more drinks consumed, more guards lowered, more men moving freely through the space. The chandeliers were still throwing gold across everything. The jukebox was still running. Leo was still there. But something was wrong. Dante saw it before he could name it. Something in the shape of the room had shifted. A cluster of guests near the center had moved. The sightlines had changed. And Leo, who had been visible from the main entrance, was now half-blocked by bodies. Dante moved. He moved faster than he usually let himself in public. He got to the jukebox in 8 steps and found Leo standing exactly where he'd left him. Small hands at his sides. Eyes wide. A glass of pale liquid on the edge of the jukebox cabinet. An inch from his right hand. Not a glass Dante had put there. He looked at it. The condensation on the outside. The slight cloudiness at the bottom that shouldn't be there in a clean pour. Soren was already moving. He stepped forward and knocked the glass off the cabinet edge with the back of his forearm. Not dramatic, not shouted, just a clean, practiced motion, and it shattered on the marble floor. The people nearest to it jumped back. Dante put his body between Leo and the room. He picked up his son. Fully. Leo's arms went around his neck automatically. The instinct of a child who had been carried by this man before, who knew the shape of this chest, even from a distance, even through silence. "Someone put that there," Dante said. "Low. To Soren only." "I know." Soren scanned the room. 3 minutes ago, while you were still in the corridor. Someone placed it within Leo's reach and stepped back. The hall had noticed something. Conversations were pausing again. People were looking. The atmosphere had shifted from elegant unease to something sharper. Dante straightened. He looked at the crowd over Leo's shoulder and he made a decision. No more performance. No more patience. No more letting this play out at its own pace. Leo's face was against his neck. And against his neck he could feel his son's breath. Steady. Present. Alive. Someone had tried to change that tonight. Someone standing in this room right now. Dante turned his head slightly and looked at Callum Voss. Callum was watching. Of course he was. He had a new drink. His expression was arranged into concern. Brow slightly furrowed, mouth slightly open. The pose of a man who had just witnessed something alarming. His eyes were flat. Dante looked away, back to the floor, back to the shattered glass. And then, pressed against his shoulder, Leo shifted. His small fingers gripped Dante's collar. His body went tense. Not frightened, focused. The way he went when he was trying to communicate something. Dante leaned his ear close to his son's mouth. Leo's cracked, new voice, still broken, still learning its own shape, pushed out 2 words. Don't trust. Dante waited. Leo's fingers tightened. Then the boy lifted his head. And in the middle of that crowded, chandelier-lit room, with 200 men watching, Leo Coran raised one small hand and pointed. The room went still, not the polite quiet of earlier. This was the quiet that happens when 200 people realize at the same exact second that something irreversible is about to occur. Leo's arm was extended, finger steady, pointed directly across the hall. Callum Voss. Callum's drink stopped halfway to his mouth. His face did something complicated, a fast sequence too fast for most people to catch. Shock first, then calculation. Then a performance of innocence assembled so quickly it almost worked. Almost. Dante turned fully, Leo still in his arms. He faced Callum across 30 feet of marble floor and said nothing. He didn't need to. Reeves was already moving from the far wall. 2 other men flanked the exits. The exits that had been quietly locked 40 minutes ago. Callum read the room. And he made his choice not to run, not to fight. He chose to talk. Dante. His voice was controlled. Reasonable. A voice that had talked its way out of rooms before. Whatever you think is happening here, don't. Dante said it once. Callum stopped. Dante set Leo down gently, his hands staying on the boy's shoulders for just a moment, grounding him, and then he stepped forward. The crowd parted. Nobody was pretending not to watch anymore. You accessed the hospital archive 3 weeks ago, Dante said. Not a question. Callum's jaw moved. You altered the file. Removed page 13. Covered a sedative dosage that should have killed my son before he was a day old. A sound moved through the crowd. Controlled but audible. The intake of breath across 200 people. Dante, you need to hear. You've been in my house for 11 years, Dante said. Still flat. Still even. You've been at my table. You've shaken my hand. You've been in rooms where I talked about Leo like you were someone who gave a damn about him. Callum said nothing now. His face had reorganized itself into something Dante recognized. The look of a man deciding how much of the truth he can give up without losing everything else. Soren stepped forward from the edge of the room. He spoke to the crowd, not to Callum, not to Dante. To the room. My name is Soren Vale. I worked in a classified medical security unit contracted for the Koran birth event 7 years ago. I was present when an unauthorized compound was administered at a lethal concentration to a newborn in that delivery room. He held up the field log. This is the original operational record from that night. The dosage entry. The personnel flag. The attempted infant swap. Murmuring. Sharp. Real. The same individual who arranged the original attempt accessed the Koran Estate archive 3 weeks ago and removed the documentation that would have confirmed it. Soren looked at Callum. I identified the behavioral pattern because I've been watching for a second attempt. It happened tonight. That glass, the one that just shattered on this floor, contained a compound consistent with what was used 7 years ago. Callum's composure cracked. Just slightly. One hairline fracture. This is theater, Callum said. You're using a stranger's word against 11 years of your passcode, Dante said quietly. The archive, the access log shows yours. Silence. Callum breathed. And then, slowly, the performance dropped. Not all the way, but enough. You want to talk about what I did? Callum said, voice lower now. Different. The reasonable tone gone. Fine. Let's talk about what was done to me. What your family cost me. His eyes moved across the room, looking for allies, finding none. You think this started with the boy? This goes back 15 years. Dante. Before Leo. Before the Koran Empire was what it is now. Then it ends tonight, Dante said. Callum's chin came up, and then he smiled. A cold thing. Small. Wrong. You think I'm the end of this? He said. You think I'm the person who designed this? I'm one piece. He looked around the room, slowly, letting his eyes move across face after face. The person who planned this, the actual architect, isn't someone you can touch. Not the way you touch people like me. Dante's eyes narrowed. You don't know who you're dealing with, Callum said. And when they find out you exposed me tonight, they won't send another sedative. They won't send a substitution. They'll come directly. The room was completely still. And then Callum said one name, and 3 people in that hall. Men who had known Dante for decades. Men who had sat at his table and called him family. Went white. Mafia justice doesn't look like the movies. There's no courtroom. No gavel. No jury. There's a room. A door that locks. And a conversation that ends one way. Callum Voss had that conversation before midnight. Dante was not violent about it. He was never violent about things that mattered. Violence was for men who had lost control. Dante had not lost control, not even close. He had simply withdrawn every protection, every resource, every contact, every corridor that Callum had used to move safely through the world for 11 years. By morning, Callum's accounts were frozen, his properties flagged. The network that had sheltered him dissolved from the outside in. There were no shots fired. There didn't need to be. Dante simply closed every door, and a man like Callum without doors was nothing. The name Callum had spoken, the architect behind all of it, was someone Dante knew. Someone tied to the original Koran bloodline through a branch of the family that had been quietly cut off 20 years ago. A grievance that had been kept alive through lawyers and offshore accounts and patience. Enormous patience. That problem would not be solved in one night. That was tomorrow. Tonight was different. The guests had been dismissed. The hall had been cleared. The chandelier still glowed, but the room was empty now. Just marble and gold light and the old jukebox standing in the corner like it had always belonged there. Leo was sitting on the floor beside it. He had his back against the wood, his knees pulled up, his palm pressed flat against the cabinet. The bass was still running. Slow, low. A heartbeat rhythm that moved through the floor and into his body and settled him the way nothing else had ever settled him. Dante sat down beside him, on the floor, in his full suit, without hesitating. He looked at his son. Leo looked back. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The bass pulsed between them. The light from the jukebox threw warm orange across the side of Leo's face. Then Dante spoke. And for the first time in a long time, the words came out without armor. I didn't know, he said. I want you to understand that. I didn't know what was done to you. And I spent years making you feel like the silence was something wrong with you. He stopped, breathed. It wasn't. Nothing about you was ever wrong. Leo watched his face while he said it, reading it the way he always read rooms. Looking past the surface, looking for what was underneath. Then Leo lifted his hand, reached up, and placed his small palm against the side of Dante's jaw. The way a child does when they want a parent to know they're there. Present. Real. Not going anywhere. And Dante, who had not cried in 30 years, who had been raised to believe that stillness was strength and grief was weakness, closed his eyes. Just for a moment. Just that. Leo's voice came out soft, still cracked at the edges. Still new, but shaped now. Intentional. Stay, Leo said. One word. Dante put his hand over his son's. Yeah, he said. I'm staying. Across the room, Soren Vale stood near the doorway. Jacket back on. Tray gone. He had been preparing to leave, had made that decision somewhere during the chaos of the night, told himself the job was done, told himself this was the exit. He was still standing there. Dante looked over at him. Didn't say anything for a moment. Then, you came back for him. Soren didn't answer immediately. Yeah, he said finally. Why? A pause. Because no one else was going to. Dante studied him across the empty hall. The man who had walked into his house as a waiter, who had carried a secret for 7 years, who had placed a child's hand against a jukebox and waited to see if the world would change. It had. You're not leaving, Dante said. Soren raised an eyebrow. Not staff, Dante said. Not a contractor. You're in the circle. You have my protection. That's not a request. Soren looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Leo. Leo was watching him with those steady, open eyes. The bass pulsed between all three of them. Soren crossed the room. He sat down on the other side of Leo, not across from Dante, beside him. The three of them in a line against the jukebox, in a hall that still smelled like champagne and consequence. There's something you should know, Soren said quietly. Dante looked at him. The architect. The name Callum gave you. Soren's jaw was set. They've been watching Leo for years, not just since birth. I mean now, actively. There are people positioned close to this family that you haven't identified yet. Dante was quiet. How close? He asked. Soren said, the person behind this has been watching your son for years, and they know tonight happened. By now they know Callum is gone, and they know Leo spoke. The jukebox pulsed. Which means, Soren said, the next move is already in play. Dante looked down at Leo. His son, who had gone 7 years without a voice, was sitting between him and a man neither of them had known this morning, and the bass was running through all three of them like a shared heartbeat. Leo was still pressing his palm to the wood. Eyes closed now. Calm. Dante stood. Walked to the entryway table near the main doors. A silver tray sat there, placed by staff at the beginning of the evening for incoming correspondence. He almost didn't look at it, but something made him stop. One item on the tray. A sealed envelope. No stamp. No return address. His name written on the front in handwriting he didn't recognize. He opened it. Inside was a photograph. A newborn. Hours old. Wrapped in hospital linen. Held up to the light by hands that were partially cut off by the frame. The back of the photograph had 4 words written in the same hand. Dante read them. His face went very still. He turned toward Soren. Soren was already on his feet, because the note read, next time I won't miss. If the story moved you, if you felt what Leo felt or what Dante finally allowed himself to feel, drop a comment below. Tell us what you think Dante should do next. Tell us if you saw Callum coming. Tell us what this story made you think about the people we stopped questioning. And if you want to be here when part 2 drops, subscribe right now and turn on the notification bell, because the next chapter of the story starts where this one ends, and you do not want to walk in late. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and share this with someone who needs to hear a story about the power of truth finally coming to the surface. The architect is still out there, and Leo is just beginning to find his voice.